Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And nice to see you all here today. So on this gorgeous day, we'll spend a little time just considering a passage from the classical by Dogen that we've been studying. It's an ambitious project to study the Mountains and Waters Sutra. It's not easy reading, or it's not real friendly to the discursive mind. But I think there's richness here, and we'll try to delve into some of that. I'll do my best with it and then turn it over to you and let you work with it further. But the passage we're going to be studying today is about walking forward and walking backward. So I'll just start by reading it aloud. You should study the Green Mountains using numerous worlds as your standards. You should clearly examine the Green Mountains walking and your own walking. You should also examine walking backward and backward walking, and investigate the fact that walking forward and backward has never stopped since the very moment before form arose, since the time of the king of the empty eon. If walking stops, Buddha ancestors do not appear. If walking ends, the Buddha Dharma cannot reach the present. Walking forward does not cease. Walking backward does not cease. Walking forward does not obstruct walking backward. Walking backward does not obstruct walking forward. This is called the mountains flow and the flowing mountains. So, so what do we do with that? Well, clearly there's movement here. There's forward movement and backward movement, and the movement is incessant. The movement never stops, and it's been present since before time, since the time of the king of the empty eon. He's referring here to a theory about periodicity of time. And the time of the empty eon is the time in which a Buddha appears. And the Buddha is the king of the empty eon. And then there are three other periods. There's the time of becoming, the time of abiding, and the time of decaying. And a constant cycle through these four different processes. As a cycle of the cosmos. And the same kind of cycle can be considered fractally as occurring in one's life or throughout one's day. And within this cycle, there's this incessant movement. It's as if Dogen is referring to a cosmic movement of which we are a part, of which we participate. Now, he's emphasizing here backward walking. For those of you who are exercise buffs, you may be aware that some people advocate backward walking as a physical exercise, because it incorporates, you use different muscles, and it challenges the brain in a way, because you have to think about what you're doing each step instead of just acting automatically as you would with forward walking. So it's advocated as a exercise. I wouldn't recommend it for people who are feeling unsteady, by the way. And also it's important to make sure there's nothing that obstructs your path behind you as you're backward walking. But clearly, Dogen is not just talking about the physical act of walking backwards. Backwards is, at least in our culture, and probably in many cultures, considered kind of a negative. We talk about being held back, or a backward country, which is one that's undeveloped and primitive. We talk about saying being held back a grade is considered a negative thing, whereas graduating to the next grade is considered a positive thing, a forward movement. So forward movement is considered a positive, and backward movement is considered more or less a negative. But in this passage, Dogen is advocating backward movement, backward walking, as a kind of necessary complement to forward walking. And neither one ceases. They both seem to depend on one another. And they're both incessant. Walking forward does not obstruct walking backward. Walking backward does not obstruct walking forward. So, of course, no one knows for sure what Dogen was thinking when he wrote these lines, but one perspective is that this walking forward has to do with action in the world. Dogen's always talking about practical things, even though he speaks in somewhat convoluted language. Walking forward is action in the world, what we do as we go through the day, our daily lives. Forward walking. Backward is more reflective. Someone is not muted here. There we go. So backward is more reflective, more contemplative. Dogen uses, in describing Zazen, the term taking the backward step and turning the light inward. So it's a process of reflection. Now, there are different kinds of reflection. There's the sort of discursive reflection that we might do if we think, oh, that didn't go well. I need to think about that and maybe try to do something different next time. That's a kind of discursive reflection. And an example of that we've talked about before in another talk when we were discussing a sutta regarding Rahula. Buddha was talking to his son, and he was trying to explain the difference between skillful action and unskillful action. And as part of this sutra, there's a lot of repetition and reiteration in it, which we won't go through. But he says, when you want to act with the body, you should check on that same deed. You should reflect on it. Does this act with the body that I want to do lead to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both? Is it skillful? Or is it unskillful with suffering as its outcome and result? If, while checking in this way, you know this act with the body that I want to do leads to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both, it's unskillful with suffering as its outcome and result. To the best of your ability, Rahula, you should not do such a deed. But if, while checking in this way, you know this act with the body that I want to do doesn't lead to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both, it's skillful with happiness as its outcome and result, then Rahula, you should do such a deed. And then he goes through, this is before you do something, and he repeats the same language while you're doing something. If while you're doing something, you reflect on it and you think this is not working or this is working, and then after the deed is done, afterwards, again reflect a third time. Did that work out or did it not work out? Did that lead to happiness or did that lead to suffering? So that's a kind of discursive reflection. But I don't think that Dogen here is talking about that same kind of reflection. He's talking about a reflection without words. And he again, coming back to this passage from the Fukan Zazenji, you should therefore cease from practice based on intellectual understanding, pursuing words and following after speech, and learn the backward step that turns the light inward. The backward step that turns the light inward. So Dogen here, in talking about backward walking, talks about a kind of movement that doesn't involve discursive thought, but does involve reflection, a kind of silent reflection. So, and he's advocating that, or saying that this kind of reflection is essential for forward movement that is skillful or wise. And this balance between reflection and action is constant and incessant in our practice. There are two books by Katagiri Roshi. They're actually compilations of his Dharma talks. And Katagiri Roshi was the founder of the Minneapolis Zen Center. And he was a teacher of Rozan Yoshida, who is at the Missouri Zen Center now. And he was also a teacher of Shoken Weinkauf, who is in Decorah, Iowa, at Ramonji Zen Monastery. So he's had a profound effect on Zen teaching in the Midwest. So the two books that compilations of his talks, one of them is called Returning to Silence, and the other one is called You Have to Say Something. And to me, this is an illustration of what we're talking about here. The importance of returning to silence, as well as the importance of saying something, acting in the world, and reflection. So I think we'll stop fairly soon here, but I wanted to leave you with an image. Oh, well, I'll just make one other comment about this passage that can be kind of confusing. He uses these phrases where he inverts words, inverts characters. He says you should examine walking backward and backward walking. So basically, they're in the Japanese characters there's a character for walking and a character for backward, and he conjugates the two together with in the expected order and then in the unexpected order. I don't know why he does this, but to me, it's an illustration of the equally important role of forward walking and backward walking, of action and reflection. And he does the same thing here at the end, mountains flowing and flowing mountains. I think it's to emphasize this balance. You know, when people dance, there's forward steps and backward steps. That's sort of an essential part of dancing, is making forward steps and backward steps. And to, I guess, an external observer unfamiliar with dance, they would say, well, what's going on there? No, you know, where is the destination? Not understanding that the dance is the destination, the forward and the backward. We have a cultural preference toward progress and forward movement. But the dance, importantly, involves both forward and backward. in a way, arising and ceasing. In order to function. So the image I would like to leave you with is this one. We were at Soulard Market a couple weeks ago and saw this vegetable I'd never seen before. And we asked what it was, and we were told it was Romanesco Broccoli. And it was described by us by the person at the stall there as being kind of a cross between cauliflower and broccoli. Very interesting appearance. And you can prepare it just like you would either one, broccoli or cauliflower. But it's also referred to as fractal broccoli. Fractal is, as many of you might know, is a design in which there's a repeating pattern that a similar shape is repeated at different scales, so that each individual shape is included within and also includes like shapes. And here you have these little spirals, and each spiral is part of a larger spiral, which in turn is part of another larger spiral. And that's the way the vegetable grows. It has a fairly simple system that instructs it to make spirals, and it just goes crazy, making spirals within spirals within spirals, or actually the reverse process. But I wonder if we were situated on the top of one of those little bumps, as indicated in this insert here, if we were just sitting there on top of one of those bumps with our human mind, trying to figure out what's going on, we might think, well, there's a bump to the right of us. And wait a minute, there's a bump to the left of me. And there's a bump behind me and a bump in front of me. So I'm the center of a square of 4 bumps. And then over time, we might develop instruments that would allow us to see farther out, and we could see that there's bumps beyond bumps. And we would at first think, well, maybe there's a line of bumps, and I'm in that line right in the middle. But we may not have the power to actually see the whole pattern with our human minds. I think Dogen advocates, and whether you believe this or not, that Zazen is an entryway to the nonverbal understanding of this entire pattern, which we may not be able to put into words, but we can at least understand our place within. And that's what we really need to know. How do we fit in? What role do we play? How do we act in the world? So I guess I'll stop with the questions about whether you find this credible. Can meditation really do this? Are there other ways of really doing this? How convincing is this forward and backward movement message? What do we find of value here, and how can we apply it? So I think we'll stop there and break up into groups.
Could you post for a second again, Will, the slide about ceasing the intellect or ceasing intellectual exploration?
Sure, sure. I think this is the one you were referring to. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
Mm-hmm.
Peggy, is that? Peggy also was desirous thereof.
Mm-hmm. Any other requests before we break up then? So we'll break up into groups, and I'll see you back in a few